With Demon Slayer entering into one of the most important arcs of the series, the Hashira training arc, we'll be seeing several characters get some pretty monster power buffs, especially now that the Demon Slayer mark has been introduced at the end of the last season, which is why in today's newest Demon Slayer video, we're going to be breaking down the 15 strongest Demon Slayers from weakest to strongest, so you can have an accurate measure as to where each of the characters are coming out of the Hashira training arc and into the final arc of the series. Obviously, this video will contain spoilers, so consider yourself warned. Starting off at number 15, we're going to be going with the character who is considered a member of the Demon Slayer Corps despite the fact that she wasn't actually trained as a Demon Slayer, nor was she given a Nichiren blade, which is obviously going to be Nezuko. I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that Nezuko comes in at number 15 when we consider how much stronger she appeared in the Swordsmith Village arc that followed the battle with Upper Moon number 6. In all honesty, she's easily more powerful than a lot of the Demon Slayers, and if we were to do a top 30 characters, she would easily be within the top 30 of Demon Slayer characters. And by inside, I don't mean that she's at the very bottom at 30, but because her power exceeds characters like Daki and some of the other lower ranked moons that will be below her, it's safe to say that she deserves to be at number 15 on this list. Her power is even more impressive when we consider the fact that she never consumed any humans, and she's clearly stronger than every lower ranked moon in the series, but she doesn't go as high to be past some of the characters on this list, which speaks volumes to how strong she is, because if she had consumed human blood like a normal demon would, then she would have skyrocketed up this list without her self-imposed nerf. Nezuko is a powerful character due to a combination of things, most notably her blood demon art, which allows her to generate and manipulate demonic flames from her blood that make it harmful to demons while also being harmless to humans. We've seen the flames also have the ability to slow down the regeneration of demons, with Daki's wounds taking longer to heal than normal and her needing assistance from her brother. When she applied the flames to Tanjiro's Nichiren blade, she turned it red, which allowed Tanjiro to turn the battle against Hatengo's clones. We've seen at times that Nezuko is pretty talented in battle from a combat perspective, being able to fight against members of the 12 Kizuki and hold her own against some of the upper moons who she did enter into battle with, while we also see that she has an advantage that other demons don't, which is that she's able to regain her power without having to eat humans, needing only time to sleep to recover her strength. When she does go into her full demon form, she's able to transform her body into her adult form, and she gets a bigger boost in power, being able to do well against Daki in that fight and later on against Upper Moon number 4's clones. Her body is also special because as a demon, she developed immunity to sunlight, something that even Muzan doesn't have, and it's something only Demon King Tanjiro can claim is something that he can do. We've seen Nezuko in her adult form, reattach limbs that were cut off using her blood manipulation. Nezuko also makes this list because despite her not being trained per se, her reliance on brute strength alone and her ability to keep her composure in her adult form, allowing her initial transformation where she loses control, it makes her more extremely deadly in battle, especially when she starts using those legs of hers to deliver swift kicks and even more powerful kicks. While Nezuko is strong during her time as a demon, she can't go really any higher than number 15 on this list, but given either how strong the other characters are or how broken some of the breathing techniques are, it's quite the accomplishment to start off this list with her at number 15 because she's in really good company. After all, these are the 15 strongest Demon Slayers in the series. Now at number 14, we have the flashy man himself, the sound Hashira Tengen Uzui, and for anime only fans who brave watching this video, you want to brace yourselves because Tengen being this low just goes to show how much the power creeps are in the final couple of arcs of Demon Slayer. We all remember the amazing battle he had in season 2 of the anime, a fight that some modern battle shonen fans will say is the best animated fight so far this decade, but sadly our boy's been power creeped out. But that's not to say that he's weak or that he's not a monster, because he is. Anytime you can have one of the most memorable fights in this series and not be in the final arc as a combatant, you clearly did something right, and it just goes to show you how busted the Demon Slayer marks are in terms of what they do for the characters in terms of power boosts. The other thing I'll say is that some of this will depend on how high you weigh his performance, while poisoned versus the statements we have from himself and other characters in the series, which I weigh some of the statements higher and I take them further into account, especially given some of the characters making them, including Tengen Uzui himself. Tengen is incredibly powerful, and prior to the Demon Slayer marks of other characters, I'd argue that he would be higher up this list. But it's worth noting that Tengen did have trouble with Upper Moon 6 and his sister Daki, and though he was poisoned, it is worth noting that he had assistance in that fight, ranging from the help of his wives to Tanjiro and Zenitsu and Inosuke. There's no question in my opinion saying that had he been fighting alone, the battle against Upper Moon 6 and Daki, it wouldn't have gone the way that it did, with Muzan himself saying that had he not been weighed down by Daki, he would have won the battle against Tengen. I think we all can agree that despite Tengen having help, Tengen was clearly stronger than Daki, but when he faced Gyutaro, there were more than a few times where it was clear that he was boxing a little bit above his weight class, poison or no poison, and if given the task of fighting alone, I would argue he would have joined the long list of Hashira that Daki and Gyutaro had killed. Again, Muzan thinks the same as well. The fact that he wasn't the one who landed the finishing blow on Upper Moon 6 and he lost his arm, he lost his eye in the process, and he had to have Nezuko remove the poison from his body, it's another sign that really and truly he was boxing a little bit above his weight class here. If we take him in his own words, Tengen Uzui said that the other Hashira are stronger and more talented than him, and that has to hold some weight because it's not in his character to make an admission like that and not be truthful. Another thing that makes him as impressive as he is the fact that he's shown impressive strength and skill on top of his blinding fast speed, particularly when you factor in the other characters in the series. They have the transparent world, they have the Demon Slayer mark, and they have the red Nichiren blades. Fighting without an arm, without an eye, all while saving others and battling Gyutaro in such a tense situation is a hell of a feat, and it makes you wonder how much stronger he could have been if he awakened the Demon Slayer mark and undergone the Hashira training. His battle with Gyutaro is even more impressive when you consider what we've been told about the power levels of the Upper Moons via Shinobu's statement, where she says that a single Upper Moon is as powerful as 3 pillars at a bare minimum. So to fight an Upper Moon on his own under those conditions while also fighting Daki, it is quite the feat. Though again, those around him, they weren't complete dead weight, and they did carry their weight at times when called upon in crucial moments. Now Tengen obviously uses sound breathing, which is a branch off of thunder breathing, and he's the only known user for it. Tengen uses explosives to dish out huge chunks of damage while also making use of high speed, and when he uses his musical score, he's able to read the movements of his enemy and break them down into a rhythmic sound, and this can allow him to find openings in his enemy. First form Roar allows him to lift both swords over his head and slam them with enough force to make a giant explosion that sounds like a thunder to dish out high damage against his enemy. Fourth form Resounding Slashes makes use of spinning motions to release bombs and create massive explosions while also allowing him to form a defense and sheer speed that is absolutely otherworldly. Now at number 13, we're going to be going with Inosuke. Now I put Inosuke above Tengen because I do believe following the training arc before the final battle that Inosuke will have surpassed him, because we have seen a bunch of power cliffing in that final arc where the characters level up, and some of the things we see Inosuke do, in particular in the final battle, I don't think that Tengen could have performed at the same level. We pretty much know early on that Inosuke is a beast. Very fitting given that his breathing style is beast breathing, but the fact that he learned total concentration on his own, it is also very impressive. Inosuke throughout the series has shown that he's more than capable of growing in power as things progress, being able to fight out someone as strong as Daki and do quite well in that fight, and this is before he even started the training in the final arc. We even see him manage to stand his ground against Upper Moon number 2 Doma in the final arc when you factor in his superhuman ability, in particular his flexibility, arguably second only to Mitsuri Kanroji's flexibility, and his extreme senses. Inosuke, when he enters into a fight, he's not the strongest, but he's more than capable of being a persistent problem for whoever it is he's fighting. We see further evidence of this in just how well he stood his ground fighting against Muzan despite being a lot weaker than Muzan. Inosuke wasn't getting one shot in that fight. When ranking Inosuke, that danger sense and his flexibility, they have to be considered just because of how they play such a huge role in his combat style. Now at number 12, we're going to be going with Shinobu. While the Demon Slayer arm wrestling chart does have her at the bottom in terms of physical strength like Inosuke, there are other combat feats that we have to consider that come from the final arc that would put her in a battle sense higher, which is what we're also using to rank people, because again, power cliffing in the final arc after the Hashira training arc, it is very noticeable, but the method in which she used to take down an Upper Moon in the final arc, it is a feat in of itself given how dangerous that attack method was, and it shows a strength of conviction that I believe is unrivaled. This is one of the rare instances where strength in of itself isn't and shouldn't be the only thing calculated solely to rank a character. There's more things to strength than just what did you make on the manga panel explode. While Shinobu doesn't have a Demon Slayer mark and she isn't even physically strong enough to cut off the head of a demon, she more than makes up for it in the way that she fights, and the fact that she even impressed Doma, it is pretty telling. What she doesn't have in power, she more than makes up for it with her speed feats, with Doma going so far as to proclaim that she is the fastest Hashira who he's ever fought in battle, and given how old Doma is, that is pretty telling. The fact that she's also willing to eat small bits of poison each day in her body to have poison in her bloodstream, also she can kill a demon after she's been eating, is also something that has to be factored in. Once she was ingested by Upper Moon number 2, the poison attacked him from the inside out, and it slowed him down to a point where Inosuke and Kanao were able to strike him down in combat. Her insect breathing mimics insects and their lethal stinging for quick strikes and quick movements, which is what she built her fighting style around, mixing in quick strikes with poison and taking advantage of her speed. The butterfly dance lets her leap into the air and charge at the enemy to sting them multiple times with poison that she hits them with. The dance of the dragonfly is a 6-strike attack that injects the target with multiple doses of poison, all aimed at weak spots like the neck and the heart. The dance of the centipede uses her speed in a zigzag pattern to allow her to throw off her target from tracking her, and it allows her to stab her target in the neck at full speed to inject a healthy dose of poison into them with the intention of killing them. And the sheer speed of the attack is similar to that of the Chidori in Naruto, where there's a huge speed amp when it's used. Doma flat out says the speed of the attack is enough that it can rip apart the wooden bridge. Between this high level of speed and the fact that she was able to keep fighting despite losing so much blood, Doma finds himself wondering, is Shinobu even human? Which is another mark of how deadly she is, hence her spot on this list. Now at number 11 we have Zenitsu, who like Inosuke got a huge power up right before the final arc of the series. Zenitsu's speed, especially when he's asleep, is what makes him so deadly. We saw this when he instantaneously chopped off the head of the tongue demon and he took down the spider demon by himself. The battle with Daki also showed progression in his power, especially given the circumstances behind the fight. When we see him use God speed, we're told at first there's a set speed limit to how much he can use it, but by the time we get to the final battle, we see him spamming it with so much proficiency, all while keeping the speed and the power of the attack itself. When we see him fight Kaigaku, the new Upper Moon 6 who were introduced in the final arc, we see Zenitsu fighting and matching those attacks and eventually showcasing that he's stronger than him by whipping out his 7th form, which is his own personal creation that sees him dash forward at speeds too fast to track with normal eyes, that unleashes a slash in a forward manner from a lowered stance that produces a dragon-shaped thunderbolt. Other things of note is that Zenitsu's power when he does go to sleep, it shouldn't be understated at all, because it's a drastic change compared to how he behaves when he's awake, where his nervous behavior is replaced by a more calculated version of himself, which led to some pretty amazing progress. It is worth noting that Zenitsu, to his credit, was able to reach the highest point of the Hashira training. His battle with Kaigaku, it can also not be understated because he more than kept pace in that battle, and it's worth noting that Zenitsu had his own mental nerf in that battle for a time because he was conflicted in not wanting to kill Kaigaku due to their past relationship, which it can be argued that he completely detached himself of his feelings from the start of that fight. And had he detached himself from those feelings at the start instead of been weighed down by them, he likely could have won that fight at the very beginning, which again is very impressive given that one Upper Moon is already stated to be as strong as 3 Hashira. Even when he helps battle against Demon King Muzan, who was weakened by the drugs, he was still standing his ground in battle, another sign of his increased power and skill. This coupled with his high intelligence, especially when he's asleep, makes him extremely hard to deal with in combat. Now for number 10, we're gonna have one of our biggest signs of power creeps in terms of abilities in the series itself. So at number 10, we have Kahano from the final arc, and in particular is her with those vermilion eyes. If it were not for these vermilion eyes, there's no way I will put her over Zenitsu or Inosuke or even Shinobu. However, as you're about to see, that power creep that the vermilion eyes gives in terms of how dangerous it makes Kanao is more than warranted for her to shoot up from what arguably would have been 15th on this list to being all the way in the top 10 at number 10. When she uses the final form of flower breathing, the vermilion eyes, she gets sent overpowered hacks for her eyes. It's a technique that raises her vision to the absolute maximum that literally slows everything down for her in terms of her eyesight being in slow motion. This ability to do that, it comes with a great cost because it does cause enough strain on the eyes to where she uses it for too long, her blood vessels in the eye will burst and will end up blinding her. And what's even crazier is that even if she uses one eye, she can still use this technique on the other eye. That also gives her the ability to predict attacks and movements, and it gives her an edge to stay one step ahead of her opponents as long as the enhanced vision is active. On her own, she might not be physically stronger than anyone else on this list, and even below her on this list. This ability in of itself is enough, in my opinion, to have her jump this high high up. Though it is worth noting that in her battle with Doma, she was possessing the speed and reflexes to remain somewhat relevant in that battle, with Doma even taking note of her movements and how she was able to use that speed and flexibility. And even in the final battle with Muzan, she managed to briefly hold her on, which again, what makes her so deadly is her enhanced vision, which even Doma notes that because of this power of hers, she's actually more powerful than Shinobu, which is another reason I put her higher than Shinobu on this list. At number 9, we're going to be going with Rengoku, or as the memes like to call him, the Donut Hashira, following the battle with Akaza, which that is so disrespectful. Rengoku prior to the end of the series would have easily been a top 5 Hashira in terms of power, and I don't think that it is up for debate either. We all saw that masterful battle with Akaza and how insane the battle got. It was a battle that made the most manliest of men shed manly tears. However, again, the power creeps in the final arc are insane enough to a point where you'd have a hard time making an argument, in my opinion, that he is stronger than any marked Hashira, particularly following the training arc. However, he is in a unique situation like Toji from Jujutsu Kaisen, where you could use feats from another character like Giyuu, the same way that people use feats from Maki to upscale Toji. You could do the same thing with Giyuu and Rengoku to upscale him. But as you'll see when we get to Giyuu, I personally think that is a bit disingenuous to do that. Rengoku, while strong, I feel he definitely got surpassed by quite a few Demon Slayers by the final arc itself, especially when we factor in the Demon Slayer marks, and there are upper moons who are significantly stronger than him. That being said, Rengoku is still pretty tough. The battle against upper moon number 3, that is a sign of that. While there is a solid argument that can be made that Akaza was not going all out against Rengoku, the fact that Rengoku, after saving dozens of innocent lives on the Mugen train, protecting Tanjiro from attack, and fighting Akaza, all while checking on Tanjiro's well-being, and then seemingly redirecting the flow of battle away from Tanjiro to keep him safe, it is still pretty impressive. And you could argue, had he been fighting unrestrained, he would have done better. Though, even as Rengoku began to go through his various flame breathing techniques, it quickly became clear he was out of his league. But he was being ridden as strong enough to survive getting a hole in his chest and having enough strength to hold on the upper 3 to where he couldn't immediately break the grip and had to resort to relying on cheap methods in order to escape. It is very impressive, and doing so without a Demon Slayer mark, that makes Rengoku that much more impressive. Akaza offering to turn him into a demon, it is something that should be one high amount of praise and should be factored in when it comes to any Rengoku scaling, because it is something that he only offers to the strongest of fighters. If we read a little bit more into what Akaza was saying, we could make the argument that Rengoku was on the cusp of getting the transparent world and the selfless state, which might have been enough arguably to turn the tide of battle, especially if at some point he unlocked the Demon Slayer mark, which I'd argue if that battle would have continued, he would have unlocked the Demon Slayer mark. His combat speed was described as being on another dimension, though again, given who said the statement and where they were in terms of combat power at the time, that might not mean as much to you. Though I mention that to say it's implied that Tanjiro did agree with Inosuke, and by this point in the story, Tanjiro had already seen Giyuu on a couple occasions, which is why I said earlier, if you want to do some disingenuous scaling, you could upscale Rengoku by using Giyuu's feats in the final arc, but I personally don't do that. It's for that reason, while Rengoku is incredibly strong, I do not feel comfortable putting him above any Hashira who awakened their Demon Slayer mark and came out of the Hashira training arc. At number 8, we have Mitsuri Kanroji, which due to her having her Demon Slayer mark, I feel safe in saying that she surpassed her master after awakening her Demon Slayer mark and after the Hashira training arc. As someone with a muscle density 8 times out of a normal person, and as flexible and fast as she is, combined with the sword that she uses, in particular the fact that her combat speed itself is fast, not her running speed, two different things, Mitsuri is one hell of a fighter. It's due to her insane body structure that we saw her take a point-blank range sound attack by Zohaku 10. It became clear very early on in her Demon Slayer journey that Mitsuri was destined for greatness, with her future master Rengoku being impressed with her completing final selection with only 6 months of training, according to the Rengoku spin-off story. When she finally stopped suppressing her own strength and the desperation from the battle with the upper moon she was fighting, it reached her peak, she awakened her Demon Slayer Slayer mark, and that gave rise to a monster increase in power. Before the Hashira training arc, we saw her newly awakened Demon Slayer mark form allowed her to fight and match the blows of Zohaku 10, stalemating and at times holding the upper hand, which is a monster testament to that power increase. In fact, the very fact that Zohaku 10 needed to resort to extending the battle to let her stamina drop, it is a sign that if Mitsuri had possessed the Demon Slayer mark at the very start, she might have won the fight before it ever reached this point. That makes all those scenes that you see where she's evading his attacks and she's pulling the giant wood dragon around and evading the lightning strikes and destroying the dragons that much more impressive when you factor all of that in. At this point in time, I would not say that this version of Mitsuri has surpassed her mentor Rengoku, but by the events of the Infinity Castle, I do think it's pretty clear that she rose above her master. Mitsuri obviously uses love breathing. It is a branch off of flame breathing, but it's the combination of her superhuman strength being 8 times that stronger than normal humans, her insane flexibility, the movement of the whip-like sword, and her Demon Slayer mark that puts her this high up. When she fought Upper Moon number 4's clone, she was able to fight off the clone, which in of itself is already powerful, and able to come out that fight without a major injury as a result. That is a feat in itself. By the time we get to the battle with Muzan, we see that she's getting tagged as one of the first Hashira to really feel Muzan's power at that point in time. And at one point, she's just operating off a blind instinct trying to survive the battle with Muzan, so she was clearly outclassed. And she eventually does get taken out the battle due to the injury she suffered. That being said, this is Muzan, the king of the demons. So going out against Muzan, that isn't anything to be ashamed of, especially when you consider the fact that before she exited the fight, she managed to tear off Muzan's arm despite her having all those numerous injuries and her being extremely exhausted. At number 7, we have Muichiro, the Miss Hashira. Despite being extremely young, Muichiro more than lives up to the bloodline that he comes from. Muichiro beating Upper Moon number 5 and awakening his Demon Slayer mark, and the manner in which he did so is enough to place him here at number 7 on the list. Muichiro is also the first Hashira in the series to be able to turn his blade red, and in the battle with Upper Moon number 1, he was also able to hold his ground in that battle and even stab the strongest of the Upper Moons. But that being said, there's a giant gap in power between the two, and Muichiro wasn't the only Demon Slayer that Upper Moon number 1 was fighting, but it is worth noting that Muichiro did play a significant role in the eventual defeat of Upper Moon number 1. His misbreathing allows him to take advantage of his baggy clothes, which hides his limbs and makes it harder to read his movements when he's attacking, combined with the mist which he can use to obscure his movements even further, and it makes him appear to be moving slower than he actually is, which makes him a huge problem for anyone on this list below him. The second form unleashes 8 forward slashes back to back to dish out damage to the target in quick succession. The sixth form uses his agility to jump in the air and take out several targets at once, while the seventh form is his own creation, which makes the enemy think that he's moving extremely slow due to the mist, when in all actuality he's moving at his peak speed before he attacks you. In my opinion, out of all the characters of the present day on this list, Muichiro possessed the highest ceiling in terms of potential, which makes it all the more saddening to know that he doesn't really reach that potential due to dying at such a young age. There's a reason this guy became a Hashira in a mere 2 months after picking up his sword. Part of it's because of his bloodline, obviously, but for reference, it usually takes 5 years worth of training on average for someone to become a Hashira. This kid was an outright prodigy. Muichiro is also one of the Hashira who unlocked the Red Nichiren Blade and the Transparent World, which allowed for the Titan battle to shift against Kokoshibo. When you factor in his combat speed was already insane, the boost that his Demon Slayer mark gave us pretty insane when you think about it. Demon Slayer mark or no Demon Slayer mark, that man's combat speed's crazy. Anyone who can slice apart 10,000 slime fish in a mere second is nobody to play with in terms of combat speed. At number 6, we have Iguro. Iguro is another character who's pretty cracked. When you sit down and you look at everything that he's done and you look at his fighting style, even while being fully blind, Iguro was able to face Muzan with Tanjiro, which is pretty impressive, and in that battle, he was actually being useful. Fighting against Muzan for the long period of time that he did, that is super impressive, especially given the way that Muzan's attacks were structured, meant to be keeping the Demon Slayers at a distance, and Iguro still found a way to survive for this lengthy period of time in the battle is super impressive. When we factor in the Demon Slayer mark and the Red Nichiren Blade, and the fact that in that Muzan battle he was fighting with Mitsuri, his love object clearly on his mind, it was a source of his indomitable fighting spirit. It's that last thing that makes me give Iguro a bit of an edge, because as we've seen before, when characters have something or someone worth fighting for who they believe is bigger than themselves, there's a stubborn boost to their resolve and their fighting power. It's a classic shonen trope. We've seen the rivalry boost being used multiple times. We've also seen that there's a love boost at times, which Iguro definitely benefited from in this final battle. Due to his love and his deep romantic affection for Mitsuri Kanroji, it gave him a clear amp in his combat ability for the reason we just went over. While some of you might find that cheesy, I think it's one of the more realistic elements of Demon Slayer, a story that while it is definitely over the top with fantastical elements, the anime is filled with all the bright shiny colors you could ever want. His love for Mitsuri giving him the power to perform those superhuman feats, it is no different than say a mother in real life suddenly awakening the strength needed to lift a freaking car off with her child. Even if it's a brief mental amp that brings out her full physical capability and is something she will never reach ever again, it's still something you factor in. In the past, I've used this line of reasoning to put Iguro in the top 5 when it comes to Hashira, but after rereading some of the fights in the final arc and setting my own love for the character aside, I can't really put him any higher than 6 on this list, which again, that's not an insult. Everyone else in the top 5, they're absolutely cracked. Even without the final battle with Muzan, there was quite a bit there with Iguro that made him very impressive, like the battle with the new Upper Moon 4 in the final arc, but he made his ground at this number 6 spot in that Muzan fight where he not only managed to get some pretty good hits in, but fighting alongside Tanjiro, they were able to push Muzan into a corner on their own, and Iguro played a very critical role in the defeat of Muzan when we look back at that fight. At number 5, we have Giyuu. Now, we saw Giyuu in the battle with Upper Moon number 3 more than holds his own, and while he did have help from Tanjiro, Giyuu showed that he's got enough dog in him to push Upper Moon number 3 in a serious fight, especially once he uses his Demon Slayer mark. We've seen Giyuu in a sparring match hold his own against Sanemi, so we know he's got monster power. Just given if we go by raw power alone and nothing else, Sanemi is the second strongest Hashira. So Giyuu being one of the final Hashira that we have on this list and being in the top 10, that is more than believable in my opinion. Giyuu's power and skill were so remarkable enough that once Akaza tried to make him take the offer to become a demon, which Giyuu rejects, and during that battle he showed Akaza's praise was warranted because Giyuu was slicing off his limbs repeatedly, it makes Akaza flat out say it's been 50 years since he fought a water Hashira as strong as Giyuu, which has high praise, and as a reader it makes you realize that Giyuu calling himself the fake Hashira, it was completely out of pocket because as a user of water breathing, we have enough evidence to say that he is the water breathing user. It's like that meme, I'm him, that's Giyuu when it comes to water breathing. The fact that he was able to last out against Demon King Muzan and then help deliver one of the decisive blows against him, it is another testament to his power. And even in the battle with the Demon King Tanjiro, for as brief as it was, it showed that Giyuu, despite being heavily fatigued and extremely injured, was every bit the monster that fans say he is. The fight with Muzan saw him briefly turn his Nichiren Blade red, which allowed for greater damage on Muzan and slow down his regenerative abilities. When he used his Dead Calm, he's shown being able to push back some of Muzan's attacks, though even with Dead Calm having the limits that he does, when you're able to negate a decent number of Muzan's attacks, there has to be some praise for your character's strength, which is why I've got him here at number 5 on the list. Now at number 4, we have Sanemi, someone who was powerful enough that Upper Moon number 1, he praised him as being a monster. He and Gyomei, they did extremely well against Upper Moon number 1. His recovery ability is absolutely insane. So is his durability, which is off the charts, being able to survive attacks and damage that would have killed anyone else had they been struck by it. We see the guy take a mortally fatal wound and continue fighting because he's just a Chad, a Tyrone, a Hector, a Jinwoo, and every other masculine name that you can think of rolled into one. In the Muzan battle, he was more than holding his own and keeping up with Gyomei and Iguro as they fought against him. These three were holding their own in that Muzan fight, standing toe to toe much longer than Muzan ever anticipated them to be able to do. While some might say, had it not been for Gyomei Muichiro, he probably would have died in the battle of Upper Moon number 1. I do think that it says more about the character that after receiving those injuries and fighting at such a difficult battle level, he went on to fight and stand his own against Demon King Muzan. He is arguably the second fastest Hashira in combat speed, with him having moved so fast that he was able to teleport. His stamina is another thing that gets him this high up the list. Being able to survive a battle with Demon King Muzan for over half an hour with no rest is just downright insane to think about. At number 3, we have Gyomei, the strongest of the Hashira. Like Sanemi, he was able to be complimented by Upper Moon number 1, who said he had to go back 300 years to think of a demon slayer this powerful, which going back that far to find someone as powerful as Gyomei, that is a huge testament to his power. He was able to turn the tide in the battle against Upper Moon number 1 more than once in that fight, which is scary considering that he's doing all this while fighting blind. Out of all the Hashira, he's the one who delivers the hardest hitting blows, and his presence is powerful enough that Tanjiro and Inosuke, who the latter he has very sharp primal instincts when you think about it, that are very akin to a wild animal, they knew right away this was the alpha amongst all the Hashira. This was the guy you did not cross when you got into a bar fight. In just 2 months, Gyomei was able to reach the rank of Hashira, and when we consider he was able to fight and do well against the strongest of the Upper Moons for a considerable amount of time without the assistance of his Demon Slayer mark, that is another sign of how physically strong he is. Despite the injuries he suffered, Gyomei, he pulled up to the fight with Muzan ready for all the smoke that was thrown at him, and he was able to assist in a key junction in that battle with Muzan. Muzan said, "Y'all don't want the smoke," and Gyomei said, "We got no inhalers, we got no smoke detectors over here." Despite being so bulky, Gyomei has superhuman speed that is almost as deadly as his raw physical strength and his insane hearing, which is so hacks he could hear the flesh of Muzan as it was regenerating, which is insane. His speed is shown by the way he kept up with both Upper Moon number 1 and Demon King Muzan's movements, which without having any eyesight makes it extremely scary to think about what he could have done had he had eyesight. Now, number 2, this is where I get controversial. I'm gonna put Tanjiro in his final form. While technically he is a demon here, hence the title Demon King Tanjiro, I kind of feel obligated to have Tanjiro on this list using his Demon King stats, because someone would likely get upset if I didn't factor that in, and Tanjiro without the Demon King boost being further down the list will piss a lot of people off. Though somewhere Kokoshibo fans are probably going to be really pissed off, because Kokoshibo was once a Demon Slayer as well, which to satisfy them, just slide Kokoshibo behind Demon King Tanjiro, put Kokoshibo at 3, and move everyone else down the list and take off Nezuko. Now, Tanjiro surpassing Muzan, that is very poetic given the circumstances that led to Muzan trying to make Tanjiro the next Demon King. While we don't see him as Demon King Tanjiro for long, Demon King Tanjiro is clearly superior to Muzan. It was outright stated that Tanjiro had the potential to be a much bigger problem than Muzan due to the sunlight resistance, and when factoring in he could use sun breathing, there was a belief that Tanjiro would even match or surpass Yoriichi, the man who single-handedly almost killed Muzan and spooked Muzan for hundreds of years after their first fight. That boy stayed in hiding. Demon King Tanjiro was so powerful that it led to Giyuu to call him invincible. This is partly due to the fact that Tanjiro quickly developed a resistance to sunlight and is able to move out in the daylight. This by extension means that all Nichiren blades and the red Nichiren blades, they are less effective against Demon King Tanjiro, and when you add in the regenerative abilities that Demon King Tanjiro has, he is the strongest demon we've seen in the series, and it's not even close. Demon King Tanjiro was shown growing bone-like whips and appendages from his back, meaning his fighting style, it would have been similar to Muzan's, being able to fight from a distance, but given he would also be able to use sun breathing, it makes him an even bigger monster. The only reason why we don't see his full potential is largely due to the fact that Tanjiro was struggling with the power raging through his body, and his mind, it had not yet calmed like Muzan's had, where he was fully aware of what it was he was doing. Had that have happened, everybody would have died. We see him shoot balls of energy from the mouth that make shockwaves that were strong enough to blow away several demon slayers in the process. Had Tanjiro never been turned back into a human, there is no doubt that he would have done exactly what the narration suggested that he would have done, which is either catch Yoriichi in power or outright surpass him. Finally, at number 1, we have Yoriichi, the strongest demon slayer in the history of the series and the literal strongest character in the series. By enough of a landslide, he deserves to be in his own tier of power. Between him having the demon slayer mark and access to the transparent world and the self-estate, and being so insane with his swordsmanship that the Yoriichi type 0 doll needed to have several limbs and swords to even to attempt to mimic his movements. Yoriichi is a monster. As a child with no training at all, he took down several skilled swordsmen with no issues. This level of power and skill eventually grew to a point where he was almost able to kill Muzan and left him so scared of Yoriichi that Muzan, the king of the demons, he called him a monster, despite Yoriichi being a mere human. Just the memories of Yoriichi that live in Muzan's blood that he gives to other demons, it was enough to paralyze them with fear, which is a testament to his power. Upper Moon number 1, when he battled Yoriichi, even admitted despite Yoriichi's old age, he was still strong enough to be considered in his prime in terms of power, and had he gotten a second attack off, he would have been killed. Unlike the other demon slayers who got their demon slayer mark and died by age 25, Yoriichi was able to live well into his 80s, which is likely due to the fact that he was born with the demon slayer mark. His red Nichiren blade was able to burn Muzan on a cellular level and slow down his regeneration, and he left scars on Muzan's body hundreds of years after the fact. His combat speed, it was on another level. When Muzan divided his body into 1,800 pieces trying to escape, Yoriichi in only mere moments was able to destroy 300 pieces, putting him well above the speed of anything we've seen in the series. His swordsmanship, it is unrivaled by anyone we've ever met. This much we know isn't just a narrative hack spawn, because we've seen it with how easily he put in the work on Muzan, and despite being in his mid-80s, he almost killed Upper Moon number 1. And we all saw how everyone struggled with Upper Moon number 1, and he would have literally killed Upper Moon number 1 if he didn't just die of old age. His sun breathing is so difficult to learn that only Tanjiro is the only swordsman who is able to master it, though Tanjiro's ancestor was able to mimic the movements of the style via the Hinokamikagura, but the fact remains that when others tried to use sun breathing, they couldn't, which that led to all the various breathing styles that we have in this series, because they can trace their roots all the way back to sun breathing. But the fact remains, Yoriichi was just built different, which if you want to see where these characters stack up amongst the 25 strongest characters in Demon Slayer, when you start factoring in all the other demons, you want to click this video to the left.